Si me detienen.
Violación.
La tortura sexual.
Acoso.
Mi mayor temor sería que me violaran.
A que abusaran de mí sexualmente.
Tendría miedo a que me violaran.
Que me obligaran a firmar bajo tortura una declaración de hechos que yo no he cometido.
Sería una gran probabilidad aquí en México.
A eso le tengo terror, mucho terror.
Que puedan hacer cualquier cosa sin ninguna consecuencia.
Good evening, Rowan. It's the 30th of December 2016 and it's about 6 p.m. And obviously this is my usual Friday evening video to reassure you I won't be seducing any priests over the weekend, so you can relax. Because obviously I'm saving myself for my beloved because he's so wonderful and we're made for each other, and we're going to be together the moment the prison door slams shut behind you for the last time. So I thought we could have a talk about torture this evening because I'm going to be commenting on the lecture you gave on the 28th of November 2016, where you were supposed to be talking about sustainable prosperity. So I've already made some videos about this lecture, but you do mention torture in the question and answer session. So I want to talk about the ways that I'm being tortured because of you, and also the ways that you've more directly tortured me in the past as well. So I'm particularly concentrating on psychiatry and psychiatric drugs as a form of torture, harassment as a form of torture, and sexual abuse and harassment as a form of torture. So I'm going to be saying more about that specifically later in the video, so I won't say anything more about it now. But you've just seen a video from Amnesty International talking about the fears of women in Mexico about being sexually abused by state forces were they to be arrested. And the purpose of this is so that the people, women particularly in this instance, will sign false confessions so the police can have good conviction rates. They're more concerned, there's more information in the Amnesty International article on their website about this, but the authorities are more concerned with getting convictions for people involved in drug cartels, that they'll torture people to make false confessions, so their crime statistics look a lot better. So this is the reason that you have been treating me in this way for decades, using trauma-based mind control techniques, which I've made videos about before, and this is the reason why I've been systematically tortured over these last 8 years under the supervision of psychologists and psychiatrists, who, by the way, also supervised torture sessions in places like Guantanamo Bay and other places in the world where torture takes place. So we can't assume that just because somebody has a medical degree or a psychology degree that that person is going to behave in an ethical way or be at all concerned about the well-being of the person who's being tortured. So I might say a bit more about that in a minute. I'm going to come on to what you're saying in this video now about torture. Now, this is in response, I'm going to play the clip anyway of the question that leads to you making these remarks, and also your response to them. I'll play that later on. But the question because you're generally talking about the environment and environmentalism and sustainability, supposedly, even though that's not really what you talk about. So a person in the audience asks you a question about changing people's assumptions and whether people have to relearn the things generation after generation. So this is your response to that question. I'd like to think it was possible to change assumptions. There are some things that people don't seem to have to relearn generation after generation. Nobody in our cultural environment would give house room for a minute to the idea, for example, that slavery was acceptable. Well, in our cultural environment, it is illegal, for example, in Great Britain, owning slaves or trading slaves or trafficking slaves. This is illegal. I know that it is in many other countries at the moment, but I'll just talk about Britain for the moment. So this is illegal, but that doesn't mean it doesn't take place. So although people generally, culturally, would disapprove of slavery and think that it was wrong, that doesn't mean that slavery exists. So it's obviously not universally believed in Britain that slavery is unacceptable. Otherwise there wouldn't be any people owning or trading slaves in Britain, sex slaves and domestic workers, who tend to be foreigners, but not in every case, foreigners trafficked into the country, who find it difficult to go to the authorities because maybe they don't speak the language or they're afraid they'll be deported to a dangerous region of the world, or perhaps their family would shun them if they've been involved in sex slavery. So just because slavery is illegal and the majority of people disapprove of it, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So it's not really correct. And this is one of the reasons I really don't like focusing on slavery that happened in the past, because I think it's just a diversionary tactic to distract people's attention from the real issues that are going on in the world today, that there are people still enslaved today, there are people enslaved in Britain today, and there are people being trafficked. And since you personally have the character which views other human beings merely as objects, who are either giving you what you want or withholding what you want, and this is the only way that you perceive other people, you actually have the mindset of a slave owner. And of course you've tried to force me to have sex with you and to have sex with your perverted associates, like you just have to snap your fingers and I'm going to do what you want. So you've got an attitude towards me as if I'm your slave and I should just do whatever you like as soon as you snap your fingers. So to say, you may say that slavery is unacceptable, but your actions denote the fact that you think other people should really be enslaved to you and just giving you what you want. That's their only function in the world. So you say that culturally nobody would accept slavery today, but 300 years ago that would not have been the case. Well, of course, there were people who 300 years ago disapproved of slavery and wouldn't have owned slaves or traded slaves, and the Catholic Church has always prohibited the owning and trading of slaves. So it's not like everyone 300 years ago thought slavery was fine and today everyone thinks slavery is unacceptable, because as I've just said, there are people still enslaved today, even in Britain and other Western countries. So you then go on to talk about torture, which is the main theme of my video tonight. So you say, and you're saying this in a very careful, calculated way, and it makes me think you're actually talking about the situation that I'm in. So I'm just going to go and say what you said now. 400 years ago, judicial torture was widely accepted, and you raise your voice an octave there to try and sound authoritative. Thought about, controlled, carefully practised, responsibly practised. And you're really emphasising each part of this, what you're saying. In fact, I'm going to play this clip of the video in a moment, even though I'm playing it again in context later on, because I think that you're talking about the torture that you're perpetrating and having perpetrated against me, that this torture is widely accepted, thought about, controlled, carefully practised and responsibly practised. So you're carefully practising, responsibly practising torture that you've thought about and controlled, and you're telling me that this is widely accepted. You then say, I've actually seen the protocols in the Inquisition Palace in Malta for how you conduct a responsible torture session. You know, people had to be trained very carefully with medical experts present so that people were judged fit to be tortured and so on. And there was an hour to make sure you didn't overrun. I think you mean an hourglass there. So I'm going to say something more about the torture of me because there is no hourglass. It goes on 24 hours a day. So you then say, we don't think like that now in this bit of our world. And you really strongly emphasise this. So you're denying torturing me, even though you know that you're torturing me. You're a psychopath and you know that you're torturing me, and the whole of society is colluding with this torture of me, and other people are taking part of it. In fact, you've been inciting people to treat me in an evil way for decades now. But over the last 8 years, people have been colluding in physical and mental torture of me and participating in it, and in a great number of cases have actually been deriving pleasure from their ability to control and torture me and know that there's going to be no penalty for them to pay, that they're just going to be allowed to get away with anything and do anything, and that it's me who's going to be blamed for objecting to or resisting or getting distressed or angry or retaliating to their behaviour. They really get pleasure out of that, of just having licence to behave as badly as they want. Some of the people I've had to deal with, a considerable number in fact. Anyway, I'm going to play the clip of you talking about torture now because I think there's something quite odd in the way that you're talking about it.
400 years ago, judicial torture was widely accepted, thought about, controlled, carefully practiced, responsibly practiced. I've actually seen the protocols in the Inquisition's palace in Malta for how you conduct a responsible torture session. You know, people had to be trained very carefully with medical experts present so that people were adjudged to be fit to be tortured and so on, and there was an hour to make sure you didn't overrun. We don't think like that now in this bit of our world.
So I just want to make a general comment about torture that takes place in the world before I move on to talking about the fact that I'm being continuously tortured every day and giving some examples of that. But you say here, we don't think like that now. This is in relation to torture that happened hundreds of years ago. We don't think like that now in this bit of our world. This bit of our world, you emphasise that, repeating it twice. So you know there are some increments. I'm not by any means somebody who thinks history just goes forward in a neat straight line and gets better. If only. But there are some things which become unthinkable after a while. Well, this clearly isn't true, is it, Rowan? I mean, what about Guantanamo Bay? Because there's people being detained there and tortured by United States authorities. There are other CIA black sites, some of them actually on US soil. They're just kept secret and not reported to the general public. And then there's also reports of Britain or British intelligence agencies engaging in torture of people, only taking them to other parts of the world where torture isn't illegal. So to say we don't think like that anymore, even in relation to the more standard kinds of torture of potential criminals or terrorists or political threats, It just simply isn't true to say that we don't think like that anymore and that this doesn't happen in this part of the world, because it does happen in this part of the world, because people from this part of the world are torturing people in other places in the world and claiming that it's for our benefit, when it clearly isn't for our benefit. And the second point I'd like to make in relation to that is that I'll take Guantanamo Bay as an example, because everybody knows about that. But this happened in response to 9/11, and it's Muslims who are taken there and being tortured. People from the Middle East, people from Britain, people from America being kidnapped and taken to Guantanamo Bay and held prisoner there for years and years and years without any trial, which is illegal, and being tortured while they're there, also using psychiatric drugs to torture the people, including haloperidol, which is a psychiatric drug I was given to torture me, and which did have a very torturous effect on me, particularly since I didn't even know they were actually giving me a drug, and I just thought that I was terribly ill. So they take people to Guantanamo Bay on the basis that they might be terrorists, when this whole story is completely bogus and you're providing propaganda for it. So even ignoring the fact that you're responsible for the fact that I'm being tortured, and it's you who's dreaming up all these filthy, disgusting, perverted ways to torture me and to put this pressure on me all of the time, even ignoring that, you're still responsible for the torture of people in this world, because people are being tortured supposedly to do with Islamic terrorism, when the majority of it, certainly in the West, is a complete myth, and it's hoaxes and other events that are staged by intelligence agencies, who are the very same people who are torturing these supposed terrorists in the first place. So this is what's going on, and you're responsible for that as well, because of all your lies about 9/11 and the London bombing and so on. So to say we don't think like this, when you're clearly party to this torture that's going on in Guantanamo Bay anyway, and that the West isn't complicit in this, we don't think like this in this part of the world. Well, no, generally speaking, this is the royal we, I'm not included in this, and I'll say some more about that in a minute, just take people to other parts of the world where it is legal to torture people. So this is complete nonsense, and a lot of this stuff is going on without anybody's knowledge anyway, without the knowledge of the general public, and it's just an excuse anyway. They start with people they claim they think are terrorists, and it's to erode the general public belief that people can be imprisoned without trial and conviction, that you can just imprison them because maybe they may be having the wrong thoughts or something. They might have the wrong religious beliefs or something to that effect. But this is the thin end of the wedge. This is to extend the powers of the state so they can just be imprisoning any person they want who disagrees with them or resists their authoritarian regime. It's the thin end of the wedge, and they're targeting Muslims at the moment, but this will be gradually expanded to everybody. And you know perfectly well it wasn't Muslims who did 9/11, and there they are being tortured in various places in the world, some of these people, because of propaganda that you've provided. So it's just complete and utter nonsense to say we don't think like this anymore, or this doesn't happen in this part of the world, when it quite obviously does, and you're responsible for it. So I'm now going to talk about things that are being inflicted on me, which are defined as torture when they happen to other people. And I've already showed a definition of torture, Article 1 of the UN Convention Against Torture, which defines torture as the intentional infliction of severe mental or physical suffering by a public official who is directly or indirectly involved for a specific purpose. And this is certainly what's happening to me, because it is for a specific purpose. It is the intentional infliction of severe mental and physical suffering, and it has been authorised by someone in government, someone with authority in the state. It has authorised all of this abuse to be inflicted on me. This is why so many state bodies, such as the police and psychiatric establishment, have been involved in torturing me. This has been authorised from a very high place. So everything that's happening to me does in fact fit the definition of torture. So let me talk about physical pain. This isn't an exhaustive list. I have mentioned in videos before about being attacked with remote weapons. Part of this is to try and mind control me, popping my ears to the right or to the left and to varying degrees of loudness. It used to be very loud and now it's relatively quiet. But it's not really always clear what that's in relation to anyway. And it's always a lie anyway, so I don't take any notice of it. But that's going on all the time, all these mind control techniques being operated on me all the time. Like if I'm watching a video on the internet, they'll be popping my ear on one side or another, so I'm supposed to know whether something's true or false in relation to the situation that I'm in. But what's always true is it isn't going to end just yet. We're just going to string it out for as long as we possibly can. So this is one thing they do, fire remote weapons at me. More recently, within about the last 18 months, they've been using these to communicate with me. Prior to that, they were only using them to attack me, to wake me up at night. I have to wear ear defenders all the time, you see. Day and night I'm wearing ear defenders. They've actually altered the shape of my face and made dark marks on the skin on my face just in front of my ears and around my neck, because I have to wear ear defenders the whole of the time because of this constant noise nuisance and efforts of mind control being used against me by people in the street and neighbours and so on. This doesn't stop them pinging things at me, obviously, but it does eliminate quite a lot of the shouting and chattering and dogs barking and the lower noises of engines revving and people beeping car horns and all this stuff that they're trying to mind control me with all the time. So that's one aspect of it, this constant noise nuisance. It's not just background noise because it's got a purpose, and they're trying to control the way I'm thinking about myself and situation and the environment by this constant nuisance and programming me with these mind control techniques. So that's one aspect of it, and here's some more physical things that they've been inflicting on me. So they started about 3 months after I moved into this flat, so it was about September time last year. You went completely berserk because you were convinced that I was going to capitulate either just before or soon after I got thrown out of my house, when in fact I didn't do that. I spent a night on a park bench and went and stayed in a homeless shelter for about 10 days or just over 10 days, and then moved into this flat, and I've been fine living here ever since, until these arseholes moved in next door a few weeks ago. So you went berserk last summer because I didn't capitulate, and I think you realised then, oh, I'm going to have to start torturing her even more because I was convinced that she was going to capitulate when she got thrown out of a house, and I'm going to end up in jail, and I've got to torture her even more to break her and to force her to kill herself, go mad, or give me what I want, which is saying, oh, I made up all this stuff, and of course David Pete wasn't harassing me, and he didn't wank himself off in front of me. This is the stuff you were wanting me to be saying. Oh, and Rowan Williams is wonderful, and the Church of England's fantastic, and I never should have left. They were always so lovely and kind, and everything's all my fault that's happened. And I'll give you sex if you'll stop all of this. This is what you wanted me to do. And when I didn't do that, you went kind of berserk and started having them firing remote weapons at me to sexually abuse me. And around Christmas time last year, they'd been firing them at my genitals and at the side of my breasts. And I remember this particularly around Christmas last year. I mentioned in one of the videos where I was confronting my neighbours that they always pretend things are going to be over around the time of bank holidays or public holidays or some nice occasion that might be happening. They do this every single time. There's a really big build up to it. Oh, it's all going to be over and then everything's going to be wonderful for this special day. But instead of that, what happens every single time is they escalate the abuse, and it tends to be people writing me threatening letters, the police kidnapping me, or the neighbours causing an even bigger nuisance than usual, which is what happened this time. But it's particularly intense around Christmas and the New Year. They always do it. It's ever since it started, it's always going to be over in the New Year. Every New Year this happens. And instead of that, they have a really massive escalation of abuse against me. So it was the neighbours kicking off again this year. Last year, a thing that happened was with these remote weapons, they started burning my nipples, and the pain was so bad, I wanted to cut them off. It was so bad, the pain that they were doing with these remote weapons, both of my nipples, and making sucking sensations on them. This is sexual abuse. They're attacking sexual parts of my body. It's sexual abuse. It's meant to humiliate and degrade me and program me into thinking that I'm a sex object, and try and program me into thinking about sex all the time, which, by the way, is something that these gang stalkers used to do an awful lot, but I kept on and on complaining about it, and now I can't look at them anymore. I take an umbrella around with me everywhere and hold it in front of my face, so I don't have to look at their filthy, suggestive behaviour. And the purpose behind all of this sexual abuse, which you thought of and which you're directing, Rowan, is to program me, to mind control me into seeing sex as a solution to my problems, that I need to prostitute myself and behave in a degrading sexual way in order to get the outcome that I want, because it would never have crossed my mind to prostitute myself. I would have never thought of it. It's just completely out of the question. And what all this trauma is intended to do, that you've had me subjected to, and that all these people are involved in traumatising me, what it does is it breaks down your normal schemas, what you think is normal. So previously, it wasn't normal to me to think about prostituting myself in order to solve my problems, any problems at all. It would never ever have even occurred to me. It was just a ludicrous thing. It was just completely out of the realms of thought, never mind possibility. And so what this trauma is intended to break this down, and then this constant stream of sexually suggestive behaviour. You're a lesbian, a pre-seducer, a prostitute, all the time. Men with their hands down their trousers, women sticking their asses and tits in my face and walking about in the street virtually naked, behaving in a sexual way, in a suggestive way, sticking their fingers in their mouths and up to their mouths, sitting with their legs apart and making thrusting actions. I was initially, when all of this started, programmed to associate bottles with an erect penis by young men sitting all around me on buses and on park benches and so on, holding a bottle over their penis. And then I've got people swinging bottles and putting bottles in their mouth. And so now I can't see a bottle without associating it with an erect penis. And I've been mind controlled into this. And it's just this constant barrage of filth every time I look anywhere. And the purpose of this is to degrade and humiliate me and mind control me into seeing sex and prostitution as a means of solving my problems. That's what all this has been about. It's a form of torture and sexually abusing me with remote weapons, really making me feel like things are being inserted in my vagina and anus with these remote weapons. This is what they're doing. And here's a thing that they did a couple of weeks ago where I made the video complaining about my neighbours, and I explained about life in prison and how quite often heroin addicts in there are coming off heroin cold turkey, and they scream the place down all night long if they're in that situation often. And I said I hoped they all got put in the cell next door to you every night for the rest of your life. And I described why the heroin addict experienced so much pain if the drug was withdrawn suddenly, that all the muscles go into a spasm, and it feels like the muscles are being torn apart. It's agonising, and this is why they can spend a lot of time screaming. So this is why the heroin addicts would be screaming in the prison if they didn't get to see the doctor because they arrived there late in the day, didn't get any substitute, and had the drug withdrawn suddenly. It would cause this agonising spasm in the muscle. Well, in order to punish me for saying this is what you had done to me. You had them attacking my abdomen, mainly my stomach region in my abdomen, with remote weapons. So there was such excruciating pain, it was making me cry out, and I had to stop walking or doing whatever I was doing. I had to do that, and this happened over a couple of days, and it was so bad. They were attacking me so badly with these weapons, it left my muscles aching even after they'd stopped doing it, and I actually got pleurisy a couple of days later. So this is the way that they're torturing me physically, and I can't go anywhere to get away from it because, I mean, wherever I go they follow me and they're attacking me with these remote weapons, even when I'm in the streets or in the supermarket or at mass. They do it all the time. They tend to do it more when I'm at home, but they do it in other places as well. So even if I move, they just follow me and keep on torturing me, and no one is going to rescue me. Everybody is participating in this physical, sexual and psychological abuse of me. And in the past also, you talked about, when you were talking about torture in the 300 years ago or whenever it was, that they had an hourglass. I think you meant an hourglass, although you just said an hour. Well, they don't have an hourglass doing it to me. They do it all day, every day, and sometimes they keep me awake all night, attacking me with remote weapons, sexually abusing me, burning and sucking my nipples, causing me severe pain in my genitals and my abdomen. They've made me ill, physically ill, on numerous occasions doing this. When they've been attacking me, I always get ill a couple of days later. It has a very bad physical effect on me, as well as the psychological effect. And also, the torture and trauma that they've subjected me to has had me screaming in the house, screaming I've been so tortured by what they've been doing to me, and this constant harassment and abuse and interference, and attacking me with remote weapons and not letting me go to sleep on a night. And so that's had me screaming. I've also wet myself on numerous occasions. The stress has been so intense, including a couple of times when I've been in the street. I've wet myself with distress, the distress that the people are causing me with all this constant bloody harassment that's just absolutely relentless. And another thing is, I've actually had my face rubbed in the fact that it's meant to be relentless. You see, these psychiatrists said to everyone that I was off my head. I didn't know what I was doing, that I should really adjust to this situation of being continuously abused and tortured, and if I didn't do that, there was something wrong with me. And the real reason that I'm upset, or that I was upset, is not because of all this constant harassment, abuse and torture. It's because I really want to be a nun, even though I don't want to be a nun. But even if I did want to be a nun, I couldn't give a fuck about being a nun while I'm being tortured to death. It's just absolutely ludicrous that they could even suggest such a thing. So they were saying that, and I'm supposed to regard all of these people who are treating me in this evil, abusive way as being entirely benevolent, even though it's quite obvious that a lot of them are anything but benevolent and are really getting off on the abuse they're perpetrating against me, and they're absolutely thrilled to have license to treat someone in such an evil way and know that no one's going to do anything about it. They're perfectly at liberty to do that. There'll be no comeback on them. So they really get off on that. But if that isn't enough, they were actually walking around with a can of drink in their hand. It's an energy drink in Britain and it's called Relentless. And so they were rubbing it in my face, carrying this around, relentless, relentless, relentless. So I've always been intended to experience this as a relentless harassment and abuse and torture, which has been going on for over 8 years. Yet when I experience it as that, some gobshite psychiatrists say, oh no, it's fine, it's all help and she's just doolally, and all of this distress and anger and what have you is because she really wants to be a nun. So and yes, I would also mention that during this 8-year period, I don't think I've mentioned this on a video before, but there was actually a period of non-harassment, and that was between January 2012 and October 2013. And even though I thought my life was ruined and everybody abandoned me and all this kind of thing, and that I was never going to have a normal life again, I thought they'd just come in, destroyed my life, and then thrown me on the scrap heap. I told my friend in August 2013, I'm happier than I've ever been. And that was just because I was being left in peace and I could think my own thoughts and potter around with little things. And after the absolute hell I'd been through, especially being tortured with psychiatric drugs, that was just such bliss to me, and I was really happy just being able to go to mass and potter around with little things and go on a few trips and stuff like that. It just felt like being in heaven compared to what I'd been through before. Well, I obviously made a big mistake telling my friend that in August 2013, because then all the abuse started again in October 2013. So I know you got to hear that I'd said I was happier than I'd ever been, because you actually mentioned it in a video a few months after that. So you wanted me to believe I'd been thrown on the scrap heap and that everything was pointless, because you thought that was the best thing to wear me down, didn't you, Rowan? But when it turned out that I wasn't worn down by that, in fact, I was really, really happy about it. You then had all the abuse start again, didn't you, in October 2013? And it's been going on all day, every single day since then, and I haven't had a single day off. In fact, I haven't had a single hour off. They let me sleep most of the time now, although that didn't used to be the case. But most of the time, they do let me sleep at the moment, but they've moved these arseholes in and they're still attacking me with remote weapons, and they've also got dickheads in the street causing a nuisance, so who even knows how long that will last. So another aspect of physical abuse that I want to talk about, physical torture, is sexual assault, rape and sexual assault. Well, attacking me with remote weapons so that it feels like things are being inserted into my vagina and anus, well, that's rape. So I'm being tortured by rape. And also, one of the effects of the psychiatric drugs that I was on is that they disrupted my menstrual cycle. I didn't have any periods for about 2 years. Now, this was in my early 40s, they did that to me. So just imagine I'd been intending to have a child. That would have been my last opportunity there. So they took 2 years of fertility away from me. And not only that, all of this abuse started when I was 39. And now I'm 48, so somebody has decided that they can just pour my last years of fertility down the drain, and I don't really think that anybody has got any right to do that, so that will be something else I'm suing the bastards for as well. So I've also been beaten in the street sexually assaulted by several people, grabbing my breasts and feeling my arse. I've experienced verbal abuse, continual verbal abuse, and when I've told people to fuck off and leave me alone, I get brain-dead morons going, "Oh, take no notice of her, she's a nutter," when they all knew that they were persecuting me. And this is what I had to put up with, people insulting me and calling me a nutter, and just arguing the toss with me like they've got the right to be sticking their nose in my business and harassing me. I've had false accusations made against me. I've been arrested by the police several times. The council took me to court for harassing my neighbours, even though they knew my neighbours were harassing me. I've been locked up in police cells 3 times, twice for the majority of a day. I was detained in psychiatric hospitals, given a false psychiatric diagnosis. I was sacked from my job for complaining about harassment. I'm being held in isolation now because absolutely everybody stabbed me in the back and abandoned me. Sleep deprivation is another form of torture. I'm exposed to constant noise, screams and voices, and I've been forced to ingest drugs against my will, and I've been treated in a degrading way, repeatedly, deliberately humiliated, and experienced sexual humiliation, as I've described earlier on. So this is the way I'm being tortured continuously, all day, every day, and the people who are actually perpetrating these acts are quite confident that they're actually helping me, they're doing the right thing, and also that there will never be any legal comeback on them because they've been told it's all right to do this to me. Like I said before, I'm the only person in Europe who has absolutely no rights at all. So don't tell me about torture. We don't think like that anymore, because I'm being tortured all day, every single day of my life, and the purpose of that is to force me to make a false confession. That's the purpose of all this torture, to get you and that filthy, disgusting pervert David Pete off the hook. Right, so you've just seen some slides there talking about haloperidol being used to control populations, basically. People who are causing problems. Sometimes that's by perceived or actual aggressive behaviour, political dissidents. Haloperidol was used to torture and control political dissidents in the Soviet Union, and Soviet psychiatrists thought that they were doing these people a favour by aligning them with the mainstream, and that's generally the purpose of psychiatry, to align people with the mainstream. Psychiatry, in fact, has always been a means of social control. It hasn't always been a branch of medicine, and it started off as a means of social control and controlling people who didn't really fit into society. Maybe they were causing problems for some people, and they ended up being locked up and controlled by psychiatrists who were more like care assistants to start with, and later psychiatry aligned itself with medicine to boost its social and professional status. So psychiatry started off as a means of control, and it's now masquerading as a branch of medicine. It's in fact an entirely bogus branch of medicine, because mental illnesses don't exist in the same way that physical illnesses do. You can't find any physical evidence of mental illness in the body or in the brain. Psychiatrists sometimes show brain scans of people who they've stuck the label of schizophrenia on and say, oh, look, there's all this brain shrinkage. But that's actually caused by the toxic drugs that psychiatry routinely prescribe and often force on their hapless victims, such as myself, for example, and they just make stuff up, some of them, when it suits them as well. They like the power and they've got no interest in helping people. I'm not saying every single psychiatrist, or even most of them. I wouldn't know about that, but certainly there's an element within there, and not in mental health as a whole. In fact, you find this, I suppose, in every profession. There's people who just want to be harming other people and controlling them. So it's quite unfortunate that psychiatrists have so much control. They can be forcing people to be incarcerated in psychiatric hospitals and force them to take toxic chemicals that do a lot of harm and virtually no good in most cases. So psychiatry is about controlling populations, basically. Controlling people who cause a problem to other people, especially to people who are more powerful than them, and certain sections of society are more likely to have psychiatric labels stuck on them than other sections of society. Haloperidol, you can see from this slide here that it's used in Africa to sedate large game for transportation. It's often shot at large game and big cats in Africa to sedate them in tranquilizer darts. So they should probably start equipping psychiatric nurses in Britain with tranquilizer darts. Since this would save time, they could just shoot their patients as they're driving past. So there's no such thing as an antipsychotic. This term gives the impression that there's something clearly defined going on in the brain called psychosis, and antipsychotic drug gently tweaks the brain chemicals and corrects this psychosis that's going on in the brain. In fact, there's absolutely no evidence that there's any brain dysfunction in a person experiencing psychosis, and so-called antipsychotic drugs are actually neuroleptics. They interfere with the transmission of messages via chemicals between brain cells in the brain. That's a brief summary of what they do. So although there's no evidence of any chemical imbalance in the brain in someone with depression, for example, or someone labelled with schizophrenia, there's no evidence of any chemical imbalance in the brain, and there are alternative explanations for these experiences that people have, but you never get to hear about those in the mainstream because of the expansionist agenda of psychiatry and big pharma. So they're not gently tweaking brain chemicals. It's the chemical kosh. They're acting as at best as a sedative. They're in fact a neurotoxin, and they cause very bad psychological and physical side effects. And one of those is akathisia, which is what I experienced and how I came to be nearly hanging myself in the middle of the night. In fact, I had to call an ambulance twice, about 6 months apart, due to haloperidol, and I didn't know I was being drugged. I just thought I was terribly ill. So feelings of anxiety. Now, anyone who has not taken one of these neuroleptic neurotoxins has never experienced anxiety. It's like you've been ripped apart emotionally from the inside. You can't get any relaxation. Nobody can talk you down. Breathing in a paper bag won't do. No relaxation exercises, no psychological strategies, nothing at all helps, because the chemicals have been disrupted in your brain, and it's this poisonous effect that's causing these terrible feelings of anxiety, inability to relax, pacing, jitteriness, depression, and suicide are side effects of this drug caused by akathisia. There's also something else called tardive dyskinesia, which is movements of parts of the body in an involuntary way, and I was constantly moving my mouth and my tongue. I couldn't stop myself doing it. This is evidence of brain damage actually caused by the drug. 90% of patients experience akathisia taking antipsychotic medication, as it's erroneously called. So It's complete and utter nonsense. Psychiatry is a bogus branch of medicine, and they've deceived the public. It's one of the biggest hoaxes that's ever been perpetrated against the human race, psychiatry, along with global warming and Darwinism, I think. Anyway, I can't talk for much longer because I can't do videos over an hour on YouTube. But I just want to let you know, Rowan, that even though I've been terribly tortured by all of this, that's still a better prospect than being involved with satanic filth like you and David Pete. You revolt me to the degree that I'd rather put up with all of this than have anything to do with you, you disgusting, dirty little pervert. Anyway, I shall leave it there for today, and I'm going to put some clips on now with some comments on other parts of the video, not my comments. I've put some video clips in there because I haven't really got time to say any more on this video now anyway, and obviously I want to spend the rest of my evening blissfully dreaming about my beloved and about how we're going to be together the moment that you're in prison, because he's just so wonderful and sexy and perfect and nothing like you at all. Hasta la próxima.
I guess my question back to you is, does every generation have to learn this again for itself? Does history not teach us enough? Back to Alan Bennett and the History Boys, do we have to do it every time? Or can we, in some way, bring that learning forward now so we get that audacity of hope back in the narrative now?
It's a very interesting question indeed. I'd like to think it was possible to change assumptions. There are some things that people don't seem to have to relearn generation after generation. Nobody in our cultural environment would give house room for a minute to the idea, for example, that slavery was acceptable. 300 years ago, that would not have been the case. 400 years ago, judicial torture was widely accepted, thought about, controlled, carefully practiced, responsibly practiced. I've actually seen the protocols in the Inquisition's palace in Malta for how you conduct a responsible torture session. People had to be trained very carefully with medical experts present, so that people were adjudged to be fit to be tortured, and so on. And there was an hour to make sure you didn't overrun. We don't think like that now in this bit of our world. This bit of our world. So, there are some increments. I'm not, by any means, somebody who thinks history just goes forward in a neat straight line and gets better, if only. But there are some things which become unthinkable after a while. Now, this is the agenda, isn't it? How do we make certain things unthinkable in the context of environmental awareness? Because I think it can be done. It does, though, require, and I'd go back to what I was talking about earlier, it does require a far more courageous engagement with our educational philosophy. I'm I am bored of hearing myself talk about educational philosophy, because I think we are more and more trapped in mechanistic and functionalist pictures of education which do not encourage innovative thought and imagination. And that's where we really have to put the energy. What moved me most at the launch event at the Centre was the way in which precisely human faces were given to the issues, the imaginative and creative was affirmed. We understood, we were encouraged to understand that to think about sustainable prosperity is to think about, it's an unfortunate pair of words, but let's use it, cultural revolution. That's to say, a deepening, a reimagining, a reworking of the whole of our culture.
We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control.
Doesn't it worry you that the children are getting no education?
No. Well, they don't miss nobody. They don't miss no.
Well, you know, folks on the left have been using the same arguments against liberty and learning for decades, but no matter how much they attack the allegedly unaccountable private schools, charters, or homeschooling, all of their arguments seem to stand on the same idea, that left-wing politicians and their cronies in the teachers' union care more about your kids than you do. Not only do they love your child more than you possibly can, but they know what's best for her more than you ever could.
Now, this is the agenda, isn't it? How do we make certain things unthinkable in the context of environmental awareness? Because I think it can be done. It does, though, require, and I'd go back to what I was talking about earlier, it does require a far more courageous engagement with our educational philosophy. I'm almost, well, I'm not almost, I am bored of hearing myself talk about educational philosophy, because I think we are more and more trapped in mechanistic and functionalist pictures of education which do not encourage innovative thought and imagination. And that's where we really have to put the energy, I'd say. But I do think it can be done because we have examples of things that have become unthinkable, even if they're not unthinkable the world over. There's something which the great French philosopher René Girard said, that in earlier ages, it took a while for atrocities to come to light, to be thought about and to be condemned. Today it's a lot quicker. We know we're ashamed, or at least, shame is around. People try to conceal what they wouldn't have tried to conceal hundreds of years ago. And even if you'd asked, I don't know, the Emperor Bokassa in the Central African Republic or someone like that, did he think torture was a good thing? The chances are that he would have said, we don't torture anybody, rather than, of course, torture is a good thing. So, it moves.
The footman memorized the number, but the prince still holds both the slippers. And would you leave a palace for a bed sit and Canterbury tales? Canterbury tales. Don't try to change me, you're wasting your time. Now I got something much better in mind. Robert De Niro's waiting, talking Italian.
Why Catholics have the best sex.
Adelante.
Oh,
what care I for my house and my land? What care I for my money? Oh, I'd rather have a kiss from the wild gypsy's lips. I'm away with the raggle taggle gypsy. I'm away with the raggle taggle gypsy. I'm away with the raggle taggle gypsy. Oh.